Okay, hopefully if there's anyone else to join, they will join a little later. Let's start. Welcome to CATISO CERT IG. CERT stands for Corpus Informed Research and Teaching. It's an interest group within CATISO, and we are mostly focusing on corpus linguistics. And that's why Shelly and Asya are here today. They're going to talk about their own corpus project. If you have any questions, please hold them until the end, or you can put them in the chat. And then if you want yourself, you can read them out loud, or I can read them out loud for you. Hopefully you like it. We also have another meeting, Corpus Corner, coming in November if you want to join, also related to Corpus. So stay tuned. And let's start. Shelly and Asa will give it over to you. If you can, please introduce yourself, maybe a little bit about you, and then we can start the presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Ellie. We're really excited to be here, and thanks to all of you for coming. So Asya and I have been working together for about 4 years, I think, on this project. I'm a professor in the English department at the University of Arizona, and I'll let Asya introduce herself. And we are here to talk about a corpus that we've been working on that is for Portuguese and Russian, but I want to say straight out that we're hoping that you'll kind of see the principles of what we're doing, and that those are very applicable to English corpora as well, which there are more of. And we're going to give you some resources about those English corpora during the talk. So Asya, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Asya. I'm a fourth-year doctoral candidate in the Second Language Acquisition and Teaching program at the University of Arizona. And with MACAWS, I work mainly on pedagogical activities and on analyzing feedback from teachers and students that we receive.
So yeah, if you want to go ahead and share the screen, Asya, it's mostly going to be her, but I'll get us started kind of orienting you to the project and what we're going to be talking about today. So yes, what we want to talk about is using learner corpora. We'll define that in just a minute in language classrooms. And we're also, we've been working more and more towards kind of defining what we mean by this, but we will be talking about how we can do this with asset-based instruction. We know that this is something that TESOL has been talking more and more about. It's something that we feel strongly about in the use of these learner materials. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you can think about those with any learner corpus material, really any learner samples that you might use in your classroom. So we'll briefly introduce corpora. I think probably if you're here, you know what a corpus is, but just so we're on the same page. And then I'll talk a little bit about the MACAWS learner corpus. And then I'll hand it over to Asya, who will take us through the asset-based approach to learner corpora and also discuss some sample materials and activities. So we want to recognize our sponsors of this project. Of course, any corpus project usually involves some sponsorship, especially we have an interface for ours, so that has been supported by a number of folks. The corpus is called the Multilingual Academic Corpus of Assignments, Writing and Speech. And as I mentioned, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Right.
No, go ahead. It's good. Yeah, let's recognize our team. So Asya's been with us for at least 4 years, maybe more. I can't remember. But I started this project with a couple of, actually 3 former graduate students, now professors themselves, Bruno Sommer-Farias, Adriana Picaral, and Alexei Novikov. They're still involved in the project. But then we also added Mariana Santana-Berto and Valentina Vinokurova and Asya, of course. So Mariana and Valentina have also graduated. So you can see we're kind of cycling through a team, but we're all very much involved in the project. So again, probably don't need this definition for this group, but in case there's people that are watching, so we're defining corpus as a collection of texts, spoken or written. And we do try to think about it being representative of a particular domain of language use. So in the case that we're going to be looking at, our domain is classroom assignments from students who are taking foreign language classes. And right now we just have texts from the University of Arizona, but our programs are pretty representative of Russian and Portuguese programs around the US. And we are actually adding more languages, not English yet, to this corpus. But we do have another corpus that is actually kind of the same framework called the Corpus and Repository of Writing that we'll introduce to you at the end. So just keep in mind, these principles can be applied to both English and other languages. When we're talking about the corpus, we do, sorry, can you go back one for a sec? We do want to make sure that we have some balance across genres or registers here. In this corpus, we kind of define it as macro genres. So we have kind of larger units like narratives or expository writing that we're including in this corpus. We do have speech as well. And so we'll see that in just a minute. And then for the learner corpus part, we are a little bit broader than some definitions of learner corpora. So it's a corpus of learner production, but it can include all students. So in this corpus, there are only L2 speakers of the languages that we're representing, but we actually have other learner corpora that have L1 speakers as well, but they're learners. So we kind of consider everyone a learner from this perspective. So how can we use these to inform pedagogy? So when we're thinking about what we can use a corpus or even just corpus findings, we can definitely use them to inform the curriculum. So making decisions about the language maybe that we're going to choose based on frequency patterns, or also kind of seeing the patterns of use that are emerging in particular assignments. And so that's kind of the idea with this corpus. Because we're getting the text from the student assignments, we're able to see what are students required to do when completing these kinds of tasks. And that helps to guide both the curriculum, but also what we choose from the corpus. So we have created pedagogical materials from this corpus. Asya is going to introduce those. That, of course, is a lot of work. So we've kind of moved to sharing these materials out and having different teachers at different institutions implement them rather than expecting teachers to always be creating them themselves. We know that's a lot of work. Of course, probably more famously, there's engagement of students directly in examining corpus data. This is called data-driven learning, or DDL. We do that in a very limited sense, and you'll see how that's done through our corpus. But we also recognize that that also takes a lot of training on the part of the teacher and the student. So we've tried to remove some of that burden of learning a new technology with the types of materials that we're using. So just to give you a little bit more of the context, I kind of already went over this, but these are college level foreign language courses. The languages are Russian and Portuguese, and we do have writing and speech. We are actually, as I said, adding more languages. We're working on Chinese and Spanish for the future. So these are the corpus numbers. So we have both, again, written and spoken text from both Russian and Portuguese. Not a huge number, but we've been able to have enough text where we can kind of start to see patterns of things that we want to focus on in these classrooms. So this is the interface, and I'll put, or maybe Asya can put the website in the chat as well. If you go to the link, you actually will be asked to create an account. We'll go over that, but it's all free. We just want people to register. And we're really glad we decided to set it up that way now with all the AI stuff going on. So this isn't, on the free web searchable or scrapable. We review the applications, and as long as someone is doing something educational with it, we are happy to grant access for free. So what can we do with these corpora? What kind of types of materials? So I mentioned the DDL. These are concordance lines. If you haven't seen them before, and this is in Russian, and if you don't read Russian, just to let you know what's going on here, we have a highlighted word in the center. We often call this a keyword in context. So it would be a word that you search for in the corpus. And then you get a little view. These aren't complete sentences, but you can see patterns. So for this view, you can kind of sort to the right or sort to the left and see what those patterns are. They will emerge from the data. And what we've done from our corpus is kind of create a mini concordancer. A lot of times, if you've used COCA, for example, you might see lots and lots of concordance lines. Sometimes that can be overwhelming. And so what we wanted to do is make it a little simpler. So we've made it so there's only 20 instances. And also teachers can actually select the concordance lines they want to show up. And then they can actually also embed it into their course management system. So the students actually don't have to go directly to the corpus. The teacher can go do the search and then export these concordance lines. It's still movable, so they can toggle back and forth, but the students don't have to learn how to use the corpus. So that's one example, kind of the more famous one, I think, for corpus-based pedagogy. And then we also recognize that sometimes you want full sentences. And so in recognition of that, we have a sentence view. So you can kind of toggle between those concordance lines and sentences and see what you want to use. And again, just to let you know, with the Crow corpus, the one that is the writing corpus for English, we have all the same functionalities. So that's another thing you can take a look at if you're interested. And then we also want to kind of promote the idea that there's lots of ways to use corpora. So here we have an excerpt. I think a lot of people think, oh, I have to show a frequency table, which we do. We actually don't have that in here, but we do that too. But you can just use these for excerpts. So I'm sure, even if you're not using corpora, you might be using student samples. That's kind of the idea here, but you just have access to a lot more student samples through the corpus. And then we do have some sound samples. Now, these are not directly exportable from the corpus, but we have permission from some of the students that we've collected these assignments from to use their audio as well. And so for those students, we've used those in some of the materials, and Asya's going to show you those and what those look like. So yeah, kind of ways to use MACAWS or any corpus in the classroom. So concordance lines are really nice for vocabulary and grammar, particularly actually lexicogrammar, so you can kind of see the connection between the lexical item and the surrounding context. So I always use the example of say versus tell for English because there's a different valency there, right? So if you want to show the transitive versus intransitive patterns, those come out really nicely in a corpus. And so that's something you can do with concordance lines. Sentences, you might want to look more at sentence structure or sentence sequencing. We've used it a lot for showing transitions as well. So you need to have the two sentences rather than these concordance lines. For excerpts, they can be used for reading, listening prediction, or text completion. Also kind of mini discourse analysis. assignments or getting to know a particular assignment a little bit better through these excerpts. And then full text can be helpful for the textual organization. We can also use it for modeling the assignments that we're asking students to do. We've used it for peer review. So instead of having, another student who's known to the other students, we can use the corpus for that, and they can kind of give feedback on a text before they do their own peer review. Okay, I think this is where Asya takes over.
Yes. So our corpus is accompanied by our website, which I'm going to show you. And on the website, we have a variety of materials that people can use for the corpus. There are publications that have been done for the corpus, presentations that the team has done over the years, and the webinars and workshops that usually talk about the more practical things like specific teaching activities or using corpus in the classroom. And you can also see what grants have supported the project. You will also be able to see the activities themselves that have been designed by our team for Portuguese and Russian currently. They are all presented by level, and they are mostly on Google Sites. So it will direct you to the activity and to handouts if there are any activities available, handouts available for the activity. We also have a demo lesson that we have created. It's also on the website, and this demo lesson is something that it's a lesson where a corpus-based activity was used, and the lesson was recorded from start to finish. So even if you don't teach Russian or don't understand Russian, you are able to go and follow every step of implementing the activity, what kind of questions student asks, how the teacher follows the steps of the activity, and you don't necessarily need to understand what's going on in the language at the same time, because there are subtitles, and teacher makes the explanations in English. So to access the corpus, as Shelley said, you will need to request access. There are 3 types of access. There is standard, and it means that you'll be able to see 500 characters of student texts. And if you want to see more, or if you want to see full student texts, you will need to request full access. And we also have an offline version of the corpus that you can download. So now that you have all this information about the corpus, we wanted to talk a little bit about our overall approach to the corpus and to how we use learner text and learner corpora and in an asset-based way. And in doing this, we draw on principles that are shared by common asset-oriented approaches such as culturally relevant, all-sustaining pedagogy, critical language awareness or critical multilingual language awareness, and linguistically responsive instruction. So what all those pedagogies have in common, and what we are mainly drawing on, is this principle of shifting from deficit-oriented view on learner and on learner language, and highlighting learning strengths as language users and learners and as critical thinkers. We mainly we mainly draw on 4 main principles that a lot of those pedagogies have, as they are the most relevant for the user-learner corpora and learner texts. We talk about challenge to standardized language use or native speaker norm, accessibility and authenticity, student advocacy, and student agency. So the central factor for us for the asset-oriented approach to learner text is a challenge to native speaker norm or a challenge to standardized language use. In this approach, we use learner text as models for other learners and challenge that native speaker model in two ways. Basically, it shows that looking at learner texts, we show students that there are other learners like them, and being in that developmental stage of language, of like not achieving some unachievable perfection in language use, is as valuable as trying to achieve it. And students can see themselves represented and see their language as legitimate through the text that they see in the corpus. And they can appreciate and understand that they're not being compared to a native speaker and their language is still developing. The related to that factor is accessibility and authenticity. We see learner texts as providing more accessible forms of language and more appropriate context of language use for learners, particularly for those learners who are just starting out in the language. This way, students are supported in their cultural linguistic background, and texts are familiar and non-threatening. And those texts contain topics that students might have encountered in the classrooms. They are familiar assignments to them in writing or in speech, and they're familiar communicative situations that they might already experience in the classrooms. Another aspect of asset-oriented pedagogy is a focus on student advocacy. We see our use of learned language as models for other learners and their production, and acknowledge that they have a right to use their own language in their own way without comparing themselves to anybody, and center their lives and experiences and languages in the classroom. And finally, related to advocacy, of course, is the concept of student agency. Countering that approach, deficit approach to learning a language, we see students as experts, experts who can articulate their own experiences, ways of understanding the world, and determining what language is appropriate for a given context and using a language of their choice. They also, by using the corpus and looking at corpus texts, they act as linguistics experts by engaging in inductive activities and guiding their own learning and their own understanding of the language. So how do we, those principles are mainly drawn from various asset-oriented approaches, and we try to implement them in a variety of ways by creating the corpus and creating activities that go with it. And there are four main paths we are following. First, we're trying to create this corpus of authentic and accessible texts that are produced by students of Russian and Portuguese. The texts that students will see in the corpus are relevant to their proficiency levels, to genres that they engage with in the classroom, and with their lexicon. The activities that we design are also very often based on the frequency of various linguistic phenomena, and we use something that students have already provided us to guide other students to examine those phenomena. And we know that since we have so many of those of certain linguistic item in our corpus, it means that it's relevant to that course assignment of the program. We foster students' autonomy and critical thinking by by creating those pedagogical activities for them. And a lot of data-driven learning requires inductive approach where students guide themselves through the activity or are guided by the teachers to understanding and to finding patterns in language. We also try to emphasize and validate development over achievement. And by showing them this text, we legitimize their language use and their language learning as they see other texts and other students who have gone through something similar when they were learning. And one of the things that we get asked a lot in the workshops or webinars we do is what to do with errors. And what we do with errors is actually nothing. We try to not prioritize errors. Our activities are based on linguistic phenomena rather than on particular errors the students make in a particular context. So we do not design our activities around those errors, and errors can be then pointed out by the teacher who teaches the class, but as guiding points or critical thinking points for students to learn, but they are not necessarily the point of the activity. So we wanted to show a couple of activities where we try to follow those principles, and those activities have been recently developed, and they are based on speech data that has also been recently uploaded to the corpus. So one that I want to go through in some kind of detail is titled, "What Does Spoken Russian Look Like?" And it's designed for beginner intermediate learners. So first or second year students, at least in our program. It focuses on features of spontaneous speech in Russian, and it's actually modeled after a Lancaster University worksheet that is based on British National Corpus. And the asset-based principle that we are showcasing here is the challenge to the native speaker norm. So this activity is actually mostly designed in English, so you'll be able to follow it. And in this activity, students are asked to analyze examples of spontaneous speech, learn common spontaneous speech features like hesitations or false starts, and to compare planned and unplanned speech and its features. So as our activities, this activity is designed on a Google slide, and it starts with the premise that spoken language is not perfect, and speech in any language contains a lot of hesitations, false starts, repetitions, repairs, regardless of language proficiency. And then students are asked to examine several experts from conversation, from a variety of texts. Some come from learners, some come from native speakers of Russian, and they can read and also listen to those texts. And students are asked to listen and look at the text and determine if a native speaker of Russian is talking or a learner is talking. And then why did they come to that conclusion? And there are quite a lot of audio samples. And after the discussion on what students found, the teacher introduces spoken language features such as hesitations, false starts, repetitions, and repairs, and explains what they are. And students who also have a handout for this go through the text in Russian and try to determine which feature is represented in the text and how it's represented. Then students are asked to think about those disfluences and why they occur when we speak to each other and share what they think. If students need help, there are also answers to the question, and teachers can use this to guide the discussion if it's hard. And then students are asked to practice a little bit by asking each other some questions and noticing disfluences in their partner's response. This activity also involves talking about planned and unplanned speech and how it's different, and how all those features of spoken language are relevant to either planned or unplanned speech. And then they can be asked to prepare something answers to the questions and then talk about them in a planned way. And then there are activity where they can just talk to each other without planning and see what the difference is for them. And you can see at the bottom that there are student worksheet and teacher guide, so they can prepare for implementing that activity. So in asking students to examine both native speaker of Russian and Russian learner disfluences in their speaking, we show students that both learners and speakers make absolutely the same things, and they have native speakers here have absolutely the same hesitations. They start and then they stop and they repeat themselves all the time, and there is not that there is no high standard to which they can aspire when they talk to someone in a spontaneous situation. Another activity that we wanted to show is a slightly different approach. It's still a spoken data activity. It's called Are You Listening? And it's also designed for beginner or intermediate levels. And it's on a topic of travel. In this activity, we show students what it is to actively listen to someone and how it's expressed, how can it be expressed in language. And the asset-based principle that we are showcasing here is accessibility and authenticity, because if we try to give students a recording, especially on lower levels, a recording of someone talking, interacting, and listening actively, it might be a little inaccessible to them. And if we record it ourselves, it might not be authentic. By using this example, we showed how speakers of language listen actively and react in conversation in an accessible and authentic way. In this lesson, students summarize dialogue about travel. They identify active listening strategies. They practice forming questions, and they use those listening strategies in dialogue about travel. So this activity is actually designed in Russian because it's designed for a slightly higher level of students, and I'm not going to go through each step of the activity, but I'm just going to show the main idea. So the activity starts with a little prompt about what does it mean to really listen, and asking students to think about how we listen to people's experiences and how we behave when we just listen to a conversation or when we participate in a conversation. Then students listen to a dialogue between two people. And after they listen, the teacher tells them that this was a dialogue recorded during an oral exam. And during that oral exam, they had to imagine that the instructor is their friend, and they're talking about, and they're telling them about their travel experiences. Then students read the transcript of it, and they are asked to identify how the instructor, in this case, acts to show that they are actively listening to their conversation partner. And there are a variety of activities that students can do on that as well, and also practice active listening after seeing it presented to them in an accessible way. So those are the two activities that we wanted to show, mainly because they're pretty recent in our development, and also we feel like they showcase our asset-based approach. if you don't want to work with Russian, there are other learner corpora that you can use, and you can draw on our principles to do it. You can check out the CROW, which is the corpus also based here at the University of Arizona that Shelley mentioned. And there is also a list of learner corpora that where you can find a corpora that maybe suits your needs, or you find accessible. And I think that is it.
Okay, thank you so much, Asa and Shelley. That was amazing. I especially love that you had activities there. It was easier to understand what you were referring to. Thank you for agreeing to join us and presenting. It was amazing. I'm welcoming any questions that you have. Please raise your hand if you do. And while you're thinking, I may ask my own questions so that we don't lose time. I was wondering if you have a lot of activities in the database, or is it just those two that you showed?
Yeah, so there's definitely more, Asya, if you want to take that.
Yeah, so we have, I can say that we have like a lot of activities for every like part of the language, but we have activities on the website, and I can probably show that. Those are webinars. So we have as activities tab on our website, and there are activities designed for Portuguese for both writing and speech for different levels. There are not that many, because some of them were designed specifically for our learning management system, and they're already embedded into it. So those are only the activities that are designed, are accessible to people who don't use D2L. And the same thing with Russian. We have writing and speech for intermediate and beginner levels. And again, those are only the activities that are on Google's Google Sites. Some teachers who work with us and have access to our learning management system, I think they do use other activities as well, but those are just, because of the how they're designed, are not accessible to the external audience.
Mm-hmm. But are you still in the database, or not working on it right now?
Yeah, so what we're doing with the ones that actually Asya presented on, we're piloting those, and we're getting feedback from teachers, not only at our institution, but we've tried to branch out to other institutions and get feedback from teachers there. I'll also just mention that we have a lot developed from the CROW corpus too, which is the Corpus and Repository of Writing. That's English. The context there is first-year writing classes. So we've been developing those materials and implementing them in our classes here, but also having people kind of work with those and develop their own materials through a program that we call CROW Fellows. So this is something that we've kind of done to expand on, widen the network. So it's not just only at our institution, trying to bring other teachers in. So if you're interested in anything with CROW or MACAWS, please feel free to reach out, because if you don't see an activity that's on this website, but you're interested, we may be able to share more or provide you with some access. We do have a couple of sample activities on our blog for CROW, but honestly, they are not as nice as the ones that have been developed on the MACAWS site. We're hoping to have those available in really more accessible formats in the future. Yeah.
That is very helpful. So in case you need help from the MACAWS team, please feel free to reach out and ask us if you don't have their contacts. I was also wondering, how do you instruct students on using the corpora? Because I see that you're providing the corpora slides for them, but do they know how to read it at all?
This is a great question, and I'll let Asya also talk about this because she's implemented these. But yeah, this is definitely something that we, of course, find is something that teachers need to be able to explain to students. So even though we're creating all these materials, and so the teachers don't have to spend all the time creating them, they still have to have some pedagogical content knowledge about corpora and how to use them in the classroom in order to explain to students, to scaffold the materials for students. So that's definitely something that we're actually researching too, like how teachers are using these materials and how we can better kind of inform them to use them in the classroom. But I don't know if Asya wants to comment on that as well.
Yeah, well, when the students see the corpus text in the classroom, so if I implemented some in my classroom, and I know that other members of the team have done, so we have this, like a mini speech about what the corpus is and why we're using it. I think it might be in one of our workshops or webinars that we have done. It's unfortunately not in the demo lesson, which is an oversight. Because I think the recording was cut out. But yes, so we are happy to share that about how to talk to students and when introducing the corpus. And when working with teachers, we address that as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. We do have a question from, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, Eli. Thank you for sharing, so much fun. I have a small question. Where do the L1 oral resources come from?
Eli, do you mean the resources in that activity that I showed? So they are coming from the recordings that are made of teachers and students together. It might be exam recordings, or it might be, I don't think they're classroom recordings though. So that we have those only when the teacher native speaker teacher participated in the conversation with the students.
Okay.
I was just going to add, I think for some of the other activities, they do use the Russian National Corpus, but in a very controlled way, because we know that corpus can be difficult, as Asya was talking about, for lower level students. And I'm sure, there are other corpora like that for English where it's just hard for lower level students to really understand. So you really have to mediate that, I think, as a teacher.
I was also wondering why did you choose to collect learners' speech and texts rather than native speakers? I'm sure you mentioned it like briefly, probably, but maybe extend could you extend on that?
Do you want to start, or I can? Okay. Yeah, this is a good question. I guess from my perspective, and I started with the Crow corpus. So I was a teacher for many years in first year writing classes. And I also was, I directed some of the classes. I was involved in teacher training with that. And so I found that learner texts are really valuable for teachers, both to kind of orient them to what learner texts look like, what they can expect. But also, I mean, I think most teachers do this, and in most classrooms, we use models from other students. This is just kind of like that blown up so that we can kind of see the patterns emerging. So with all of these corpora, MACAWS and Crow, we're collecting from the classes that we're teaching in as well. And so it's more relevant for these students than, an academic journal article, which is a lot of corpora out there. I mean, there are some that are closer to what our students are doing, especially if you're working with graduate students, but for undergraduate level writing, there's kind of a mismatch there between what we're asking students to do. And same with the Russian and Portuguese language classes, there are national corpora, like we just mentioned, but teachers often report that the gap between where their learners are and where the corpus language is pretty big. And so it's not that you can't use them, but there's a lot of mediation. And we really see a value in bringing learner language into the classroom to learn from. And that's where this asset-oriented approach comes from. It's really valuing that learner language. Not to say that, of course, learners are there to learn and enhance their linguistic resources, but they can do that by learning from other learners as well.
Awesome. Does anyone else have a question? I don't want to take a chance from anyone else because I have a plenty and I can just ask them. But I would like to hear from others.
I see Marcia's here, so I'm just going to say that we do have, I think there's one activity in the Russian activities that does have some pronunciation, but we'd like to do more with that. I have actually done that with another corpus. I've used the corpus for pronunciation instruction. It's obviously like a lot more difficult. You have to have the sound files. You have to be able to, you know, have access to those. First of all, so that's part of what we did with this IRB. We set it up so that students could opt in to having us use their sound files for this purpose. So we have more that we can use from these corpora, but I think it's also, there's so many opportunities. I think the samples that Asya showed is kind of like what I imagine that I mean, what I've done with the pronunciation lessons and what we can do, where it's not, you know, it's going to be really different. It's not looking at concordance lines. It's listening to speech samples and kind of trying to understand the patterns of use in that way. You might have fewer samples than you normally do with a corpus activity, but I think that's fine. It's kind of like using some kind of model and working with that and just having access to this really authentic data, I think is the main thing.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a few more questions, but please feel free to interrupt me and ask a question if you want to. So I was wondering if you always collected the corpus from the real classroom, or there were several instances where you just made the dialogue. I mean, you had a meeting for the native speaker and the learner together, specifically for the study.
No, that has never happened.
Okay.
No, we collect assignment, like we work with teachers to collect assignments that and students sign consents for that. So then we collect writing assignments, and if there are any recordings, which especially happened a lot during the pandemic, where students recorded a lot of their homework assignments, we collected those too and transcribed and uploaded to the corpus.
Mm-hmm. But it was for classroom purposes, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's where we're saying, like, this is representative of the assignments that they're doing in the classroom. So of course, there are advantages to having more control over assignments, but we wanted to really capture what's happening in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking that maybe it could be useful if you show to the folks how would you use those concordance lines, like say with Russian that you showed, for teaching, like a teaching sample. How would you use those sentences? Why would they be helpful in the classroom, if you can?
Well, yeah, we can. And if people want to like look at the entire process, they can access our demo video, but I can also show the activities that are based on concordance lines. I can't show Portuguese, but I can show Russian. So for example, this one is about the verbs of position. Hanging, lying, and standing. And the problem is that Russian conceptualizes this very differently. When in English, we would normally use the verb to be. In Russian, we would use 3 different verbs. So that is a point of difficulty for students. And the the way this activity goes, students look at this concordance on concordance lines with different verbs, and they see the verb that you can see highlighted in yellow, and they can see the context of the verb, so how it's used, and they are looking at those concordance lines, and they can see how a different verb has a slightly different context or is used in slightly different collocations. So, for example, we would use the verb stand when we talk about a furniture that has legs, so to speak, or, you know, if it's a carpet or it's a rug, it lies down. And very few things usually hang, things like curtains and I don't know what else hangs actually. And yeah, so basically this is how a lot of the activities are built around students looking at the concordance lines and analyzing the contexts, and then using that context in like a controlled exercise. Yeah. I don't know if that was very clear, because
so the general idea is that the students look at the sentence and the highlighted word and see the same word in different contexts,
yeah.
right?
Or they yes, or they might see different words in a variety of contexts as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It depends on what the purpose is.
I do like the fact that you're asking them to create hypotheses regarding the use of the target structures, right? That getting them just to start noticing like that. So they notice it within concordance lines, but they also might notice it when they're reading or other places as well. I think that's great.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely the principle behind this, is to kind of flood them with this information, help them to see patterns if there are like lexicogrammatical occurrences, and then yeah, hopefully they're taking that into other extended reading or other kinds of contexts.
Right. You can even do follow-ups where you ask them to find other examples of similar things and other things that they may read or find on the web or what have you, right?
Yeah, that's great. And we often are then also asking them to use these in their writing, right? So following up with some kind of production task as well. Yeah.
Can I ask you how you chose the languages? Why Portuguese and Russian? Was it because it was more accessible at the time of compiling the corpus for you?
Well, it definitely was driven by the graduate students that I was working with, but we also really like that they're less commonly taught languages because there's just a lot fewer resources. So we still need more for English. I'm not saying we don't, but we have a lot for English compared to these languages. So, you know, we did a kind of review of what's out there, and there's really nothing like this for those languages. So it was also knowing that we had a site that we could create materials for and implement, because it was always, I mean, we also had folks do linguistic analysis with these. So that's a huge, you know, that's a whole other aspect of these that can be done and have been done. But we also, from the beginning, were very interested in the pedagogical uses. And so we knew we could also implement them, which has been great.
Yeah, it's pretty helpful to have resources for languages other than English, because there's so many for English and so much less for others. Yeah. Okay, if there are no other questions, we could end the meeting here. Thank you so much for participating for the talk. That was so informative, and you're so knowledgeable, both of you. I'm so glad that I know you. I would love to have an opportunity to work with you too, and hopefully other folks could contribute somehow or use the corpus and let us know that if it was useful for them in their teaching. Thank you so much, Asa and Shelley, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, and like I said, please feel free to reach out if you're interested in getting access to other materials that we didn't show today. And any kind of collaboration is definitely welcome.
Okay, thank you. And have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you, Ellie.
Want to end the recording?
Yes.